If this is coming in weird, the sound quality of the music, let me know and I'll turn it off. Can you hear me okay? Otherwise? I'm sideways. Fuck. Alright. I didn't know. It was contingent upon that. Stupid phone. Alright. Is that better? See, I dressed for the occasion. You can read it backwards. It's the Infinity Gauntlet. Oh, stop. Thanks, Brent. I figured this would be a good thing to play. It's 2 minutes long. Get people to a chance to get in here. Shabadoo's watching me from the other room. Looks like he heard you. He came right over. Alright. I don't know if I can talk in front of this many people. It's a huge group we're looking at here. Nope. No. Sorry. We'll do it later. We can't do it right now. He wants to play fetch. Oh, alright.
To fly a rocket.
Alright, settle down. No one cares about rockets. We're not talking about that. Alright. So, alright, YouTube it is. That's fine. We can fix anything in post, right? Hey, Ollie. Alright, guys. So, I've been asked to just explain some of the more basic things up front. So, I will be talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it today, and some of the important stuff. So it's called the Infinity Saga for a reason. It's based around the Infinity Gems, which are very powerful stones from the beginning of time, and they pop up in different movies over the last 12 years, and then the culmination with them in the last couple of movies, as you may or may not know if you've seen them. So MCU is the term I'm going to be using, which is Marvel Cinematic Universe. Are there any other questions right now that I should be answering? Because I'm probably just going to go, and if there's stuff that I feel probably isn't common knowledge, I will break it down, but I'm going to just kind of touch the main points. I'm going to go in chronological order. Marvel back in, I think it was due to the whole Homecoming discrepancy between Homecoming and Captain Marvel, they released an official timeline. Since then, they haven't updated it, but I've been kind of plugging it in as I think it works. So we'll go in order of how Marvel wants to do it, and then I'm going to talk about the main characters, a lot of the main characters that were introduced that are going to be important. Hey, Kevin, you figured it out. Congratulations. And then the villain, whether or not they can come into play later, and then the history of the Infinity Stones throughout the movies. So without further ado, we'll get going. The first movie, chronologically, was Captain America, the First Avenger, which took place in World War II, so the 1940s. In this movie, we meet the First Avenger, Captain America. He was very small and frail, and then he gets the Super Soldier Serum, which is a injection that was combined with Vita Rays, which is Dr. Ensign, which was the German scientist played by Stanley Tucci, who ended up dying. He created the serum, and then the Vita Ray machine was created by Howard Stark, who is Tony's dad. So he was just as smart, and I think he was in his early 20s at this time. So that's how they all met. That's how Captain America met the Stark family originally. And then in that movie as well, you meet the Red Skull, who is the villain, and he actually ends up finding, at the beginning of the movie, he finds the Tesseract, which is, spoiler alert, not a Marvel-specific term. It's actually a geometrical term. It's a four-dimensional cube, essentially. So he finds the Tesseract and uses it to create all these weapons that shoot firepower and lasers and energy, blah, blah, blah. And Captain America has to go fight him and defeat him, and he ends up on a plane with Red Skull, and they fight, and then randomly Red Skull touches the Tesseract, and he seemingly dies, but we know now he was teleported because the Tesseract houses the Space Stone, which is the first Infinity Stone chronologically that was introduced to us. And it's inside the Tesseract, and at the end of the movie, Steve crashes the plane into the iceberg, so the Tesseract is lost until, I think Howard Stark fishes it out of the ocean. Excuse me. And also in that movie, important characters are Peggy Carter, who comes into play a lot later on. She's a very important character throughout the comics. Also, we meet Bucky Barnes, who we find out later, spoiler alert, is the Winter Soldier. And more on that later. Then the next movie after Captain America, we fast forward to 1995 as Captain Marvel, and that's when we're introduced to the woman we now know as Captain Marvel. At the time, we don't know that she doesn't know that she lost her memory. She had amnesia. She was abducted, apparently, or taken aboard by these Kree people and blood transfusions. So now she's technically part of the Kree, which is an alien race that we actually first saw in Guardians of the Galaxy, but chronologically again is first in Captain Marvel. So Peggy actually did have a spin-off. Sorry to detract from the story, but she had a mini series, two seasons actually. It was really good. It could have kept going. They actually used Jarvis. He was like his her sidekick, which is Howard Stark's butler, now Tony Stark's AI, now Vision. More on that later. Anyway, back to it. Sorry, guys. Captain Marvel. In that movie, you meet again chronologically Ronan the Accuser for the first time, who ends up being a big villain later on. Yon-Rogg, who starts off as a good guy, he's played by Jude Law. He ends up being an asshole. And Captain Marvel, we find out, gets her powers from the same Tesseract that the Red Skull found in Captain America. So the history of the Tesseract is that it was lost in sea. Howard Stark found it, so then it was under S.H.I.E.L.D.'s care through the 90s into the 2000s until the Avengers, which we'll get to that later. And then I think we also meet Maria and Monica Rambeau, who could potentially play big parts later on, as well as the Skrulls, who are a big alien race, who in the comics are actually evil, but in the in the movie they are just trying to find their way because the Kree have been hunting them down. And we also find Talos and his wife Soren, who we find out later on are spoiler alert. I'll get to that later. And we also meet Goose, who is the reason that Nick Fury only has technically one eye. He's the one that scratched his face, blah, blah, gave him the eye patch. So a little history there for you. Chronologically, next, going into the next movie is Iron Man, which takes place in 2008. And obviously we meet Iron Man. He's abducted by this organization called the Ten Rings, who is actually, they're getting a movie, Shang-Chi and the Ten Rings, that's coming up in 2021. And they kidnap him. Later do we find out it was actually his kind of boss and best friend, Obadiah Stane, who ends up being the Ironmonger because he uses the same design of the suit that Tony first built, and they end up fighting Iron Man versus Ironmonger. Ironmonger dies, and then we also see Rhodey, who's played by Terrence Howard, who's shitty, and we meet Happy Hogan, we meet Pepper Potts, we meet Agent Phil Coulson, Nick Fury, and of course we see Jarvis as the AI there. And Iron Man is kind of back in 2008, it kicked off the MCU, so it kind of, introduced everybody to everything. And then from there, we had the Incredible Hulk. I'm sorry, no, Marvel says chronologically, Iron Man 2 took place before the Incredible Hulk. So Iron Man 2 is the next Iron Man movie, obviously, and actually we meet Black Widow in this movie. She starts off as like a agent or a secretary type character, and then she ends up being a badass, which we all know now. We also meet Whiplash, played by Mickey Rourke, who's the Russian version, basically, of Iron Man. I'll get to that, Stacey. I'll get to that. And he ends up fighting Iron Man just because he wants to make him bleed, this and that. We also meet Justin Hammer, who's kind of a douchebag and kind of a dummy, but he's really funny and a good support villain. And then also we're introduced to the more important Don Cheadle version of Rhodey and War Machine, which is awesome because his version of Rhodey is much better than Terrence Howard's in everybody's opinion. And he's really great later on in the movies. And then after Iron Man 2, not a lot of significance happens there. That's just kind of the movie. After Iron Man 2 is the Incredible Hulk. We meet the Hulk, who is played by Edward Norton at the time. We also meet Lieutenant Ross, who is still in the movies as of Civil War, and Lieutenant Ross is Betty's dad. Betty's the girl that Bruce Banner's pining after, blah, blah, blah. He ends up fighting the Abomination, who's another version of the Hulk, just more evil, and they fight, and the Abomination loses, but they actually reference him in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. In season 1 or 2, I think. It's actually kind of funny. But again, that's not really a significant movie. People actually don't really like it. People are trying to, forget it, that it ever existed, which I don't blame them. It's really not a great movie. But next is Thor. And again, that was another weird one. It was like great casting, great cinematography, great villain. It was just a really bad movie for some reason. But you meet Thor, and then you meet his 3 best friends, the Warriors 3, who are Fandral, Volstagg, and Hogun. And then you meet Lady Sif, who's another badass warrior. You meet Frigga and Odin, who are his mom and dad, respectively. And you meet Jane Foster, who's a dumb bitch. She's an astrophysicist who works with Darcy the intern and Dr. Eric Selvig, who's a big expert on astrophysicist stuff as well. And we actually are introduced to Hawkeye in this movie. If you forgot, he's also in that movie. And the importance of Thor is that he introduced, really the introduction of Loki, because he ends up being such an asshole later on. And he ends up redeeming himself, becoming kind of a good guy, but he's the main reason that the Avengers form in the first place. So, anyway, after Thor, moving on, the next chronological movie is The Avengers. Yeah, so it's the culmination of everybody. This is where everyone meets up together. We meet Maria Hill, who's a badass, played by Colby Smulders. We meet the Ruffalo version of Bruce Banner and the Hulk. We meet Thanos for the first time. He has a little cameo in it, a couple of cameos. We also meet the Chitauri, who are an alien race, kind of, I wouldn't say enslaved by Thanos, but they're kind of his bitch. And like I said, Loki's the villain here, and they're introduced another concept with the this staff he has that's able to control people. So he comes out of this portal created by the Tesseract, which is in the hands of S.H.I.E.L.D. He brainwashes Hawkeye and takes him under his wing, this and that, no pun intended. And he takes the Tesseract with him, and he has this staff, which ends up actually being the way that they close the portal at the end of the movie. So then at the movie, they culminate. It's Hawkeye, Black Widow, Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, and Hulk, and they get together and they're a team and they kick ass and it's super cool. What we don't know at the time is that in the scepter is the Mind Stone, which is the second Infinity Stone that we're technically introduced to, and this one is also a big part of how Vision is created later on. If you haven't seen the movies, so again, 2 Infinity Stones now have been introduced. We have the Space Stone, and then we have the Mind Stone, and the Tesseract, and the Loki's Scepter. The next movie after the Avengers is Iron Man 3, and it's we're introduced to the Mandarin, which is played by Ben Kingsley, but it's actually, he ends up being a joke character for the real villain, who's Aldrich Killian, who makes this stuff called Extremis, which ends up like if your body's incompatible, you will explode, which is causing bombs, they're pretending it's bombs being exploded across the country, but really he is responsible. We also meet Harley, who's a small child that helps Tony when he ends up flying to Tennessee because Jarvis, sets his GPS to that right before his house gets blown up because he gives the Mandarin his home address after Happy gets caught up in one of these explosions at Chinese Man Theater. And so, in a fit of rage, he gives his address to the reporter, and then the Mandarin's people show up and blow his house to shit. And everyone thinks he's dead, but he ends up flying off to Tennessee, and this kid helps him, and then he ends up driving down to Florida to, beat this guy. We also meet Maya Hansen, who's not really important down the road, and she's just kind of there because she helped create Extremis. And then actually Pepper gets Extremis, and then so Tony has to figure out a way to save her, and he ends up also at the end of the movie getting his the shrapnel in his chest taken out, so he doesn't need the arc reactor in his chest anymore, but he still wears the thing on his chest, and as we saw in Infinity War and Civil War and all that shit. And then not an Infinity Stone in that one. So the next movie chronologically is Thor: The Dark World. Again, great casting, great cinematography, excellent villain. Just a bad movie, and I think I don't know what. Honestly, I don't know. But I mean, again, Natalie Portman was in it, so that's a recurring factor. She wasn't in the third one. The third one was amazing. So also they changed directors. So that's probably a big deal. Anyway, in this one we meet Bor. Kind of, he is Thor's grandfather, Odin's dad, and he ends up banishing the ether, which we don't know until later is another Infinity Stone, but it's in the form of like a, like if if it was a cigarette commercial and people were exhaling, that's what you would see, kind of. But it's red, and it warps reality, and it ends up she really does, and it ends up being absorbed by Natalie Portman. And we also meet Malekith, who's a dark elf and who's awakened when the ether is found by Natalie Portman. And then Curse, who is just a badass who just fucking beats Thor's ass until Loki steps in and is able to kill him. But he ends up dying in the process. We also meet the Dark Elves, which are another race of people. They're from one of the 9 realms. Well, they're actual stones, but they're enveloped in different realms. Like, so in the Space Stone was inside of the Tesseract. The Mind Stone was inside of the Scepter, and then the Ether is in the form of kind of like a cloud, but it ends up condensing into a stone when push comes to shove for the later movies. They don't explain how or why, but they all end up taking the form of a stone from what they're housed in. And at the end of the movie, they end up defeating Malekith, obviously, and they take the ether to the Collector, played by Benicio del Toro, who's actually a really good actor. And the Collector, I found out recently, I don't know if this is Marvel MCU canon, but in the comics, he's an elder, which is like they've been around forever. And eventually, he started off collecting for the greater good of, preserving things. But then he just started to do it obsessively, and that's his thing now. He collects. So he's collecting the Infinity Stones. That's why he says 1 down, 5 to go. He's got one of the Infinity Stones in his hand. And that's important because it stays there basically until Thanos comes knocking on the door. The next movie after that is Captain America and the Winter Soldier. That's where we meet the Winter Soldier, who we find out is Bucky from back in World War II. I forgot to mention he ends up actually what we think is he ends up dying because he falls off a train that's on a fucking mountain. But he ends up being saved, and one of his arms is replaced by vibranium, which, I forgot to mention that too, is also what Captain America's shield is made out of, and it's a very rare metal, only in Wakanda, which we'll get into later, but they only had a small amount in 1940s, so they made it into Captain America's shield. And, excuse me, and then we also meet Alexander Pierce, who we find out he's the main guy in S.H.I.E.L.D., but we find out that S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra's been living under S.H.I.E.L.D. since the 40s when they thought they were exterminated, but they end up living within them and being more powerful in a way because they develop these 3 helicarriers that are targeting heroes and people that they think will be Hydra's threats, like Tony Stark, Stephen Strange, etc., like the guy on the rooftop was saying when they were interrogating him on the rooftop. We also meet Falcon, who's a big part later on. He's now taken the mantle of Captain America, which the show is premiering in August. We also meet Rumlow, who ends up being Crossbones, who's an asshole in in Civil War. S.H.I.E.L.D. is the strategic homeland for something in Enforcement, Logistics, and Division. It's the organization that basically is in charge of keeping everything super hush-hush with superheroes and aliens and shit. They're like the Men in Black times 10. Well, not with aliens, but they're with their resources and stuff. Anyway, we also meet Agent 13, who is Peggy Carter's great grandniece or some shit. But they're related. And we also meet Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, who are in the comics. They are actually Magneto's children, but because of the shit back in that time, Fox owned mutants, so they couldn't be mutants, so they had to retcon their creation. So at the end of Civil War, we see them. At the end of Civil War, we see them being experimented on with the Mind Stone, and that unlocks their potential, which will probably be retconned just to be the mutant gene now that Disney owns Fox. But yeah, they originally were Magneto's kids, and then they weren't. And then for some reason, even though Quicksilver is faster than a speeding bullet, he gets killed by several bullets, which is shitty. And we also meet Everett Ross, who's a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. He's cool. He ends up being in Black Panther later on. No Infinity Stone there. Moving on, Guardians of the Galaxy. Chronologically, we meet the Guardians of the Galaxy. We meet Star-Lord, we meet Groot, Gamora, Drax, and Rocket, who are all really interesting aliens in their own regard. They come together in jail, actually. In the reason they all are... So Star-Lord is looking for a thing that he doesn't know what it is, and he's going to find it. And then Gamora is looking for the same thing, so she's trying to get it from him. And then Rocket finds that there's a bounty out on Star-Lord's head by the people he was previously hanging out with. Best soundtrack ever, yes, agreed. And so they all end up fighting in public, and then they all end up going to jail together where they find Drax. And then they all end up breaking out of jail, blah, blah, blah. And Ronan the Accuser, like I said, from Captain Marvel, he's the main bad guy in this movie. He's actually Thanos' lackey, and Gamora and Nebula are actually the daughters of Thanos as well, but they're on loan to Ronan right now. And then we meet Nova Prime. She's like in charge of the Nova Corps, which they could be a big deal later, unless they don't do anything with them, because they hit in Infinity War. Thanos had to kill all the Xandarians to get the stone, but more on that later. We also meet Yondu, who's really awesome. He's kind of a dick in this movie, but he has a really great arc of redemption in the second movie. That seems to be the kind of characters Michael Rooker always plays. And then we also are more, not chronologically, but first time, well, chronologically in the way the movies were introduced or released, we meet the Kree for the first time, and they're blue people. We also meet the Xandarians, who are human-like, and some of them are pink. I don't know. And we also see, so what they end up finding is they find it in the orb that Star-Lord was finding. They take it to the Collector, who, remember, we met him at the end of Thor, the Dark World, and he opens it to reveal and gives them the backstory on the Infinity Stones, and it opens it to reveal the Power Stone. And the stupid bitch that's his slave decides that she's going to be, oh, it's my stone, and she grabs it, and she ends up dying in a fiery explosion, even though she didn't expect to, even though he just showed a video of it happening right above her. But so she dies and explodes, and then they take the stone and leave, and then they try and ward off the attack from... Change him a lot for this second. Change who, Ollie? The Collector? But they end up trying to stop Ronan the Accuser from getting to Xandar to wipe out the Xandarians, because the Kree and the Xandarians had a war back in the day, and they squashed the beef, but Ronan's not satisfied. He's one of those guys. So he's trying to wipe them out, and they end up, the Power Stone, it's on Ronan's hammer. He's about to drop it on the planet, and they fucking shoot it with a gun, and it flies off, and Star-Lord dives for it, knowing he'll probably die if he touches it, and he grabs it, and he starts to disintegrate, but then the other Guardians, rally around him, and they touch him, and they distribute the power, and they're able to destroy Ronan. And we find out at the end of the movie the reason that he's able to do that is because he's more than just a human. So there's more on that later. Oh, they didn't, I don't know if they changed him, but they gave him a really good redeeming story, in my opinion, because you learn more about him in the second movie, which chronologically is the next movie. So I'll just jump right in. So the Guardians, after they've gone away, they are looking for... They're basically mercenaries now. It's just a callback to Howard the Duck. He was in the comics. He's actually in Infinity War if you freeze frame at the right time, but he's just there as like an Easter egg. He's not really significant. But in Infinity, at the end of Guardians, we think dies because he covers them in like a ball of himself, and they end up dying, or they end up crashing, and there's none of him left. But then Rocket finds a twig and plants it, and he ends up growing, and we have Baby Groot, who was the thing before Baby Yoda. Let's all take a step back and remember when times were times. But Baby Groot grew up to be he was Baby Groot in Guardians too, actually. And they end up being mercenaries for these people called the Sovereign, who were a gold people led by this woman named Aisha for some reason. And they end up... Rocket ends up stealing these batteries and makes enemies with them, and they end up getting chased by the Sovereign, and they're saved by this guy who they don't know, and they go through a vortex, and he's followed them there, and they're like, oh, who the fuck are you? And he's like, oh, by the way, I'm your dad, Peter. And they follow him back to his planet, and he tells them his backstory, and they're like, oh man, this is too good to be true. But we're going to enjoy the hell out of it until we know anything different. And that's where they meet Mantis too, and she's kind of like his caretaker. She helps him sleep, and they find out that he's been all over the galaxy, or all over the universe, planting seeds and bringing the children back. And if they didn't have his same powers he had, he kills them. So they end up finding, like when Nebula... There's a lot of good parts. This movie's really fucking good, so I'm just going to kind of skim through it because there's a lot of good shit that happens. Especially the scene where fucking Yondu gets his fin back and he fucking kills everyone with the arrow. It's super cool. Anyway, that's not really important to the story. It's just really fucking cool. But they end up finding out the Ego is this thing called a Celestial, which I don't think James Gunn knew what a Celestial was when he gave him that authority. So I'm not sure if Marvel's going to retcon that when they actually introduce Celestials. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, he's considered a celestial, and he's actually a living planet. So he is the planet. His consciousness is like a brain at the core of the planet instead of liquid hot magma. It's a brain with pulses and shit. And so Baby Groot is the only one small enough to get in there. So they send him with a bomb, and Rocket's trying to talk him through. He's like, push this button, then this button, but do not push this button. And he's like, all right, now what do you do? And Groot always keeps saying, I want to push this button. He's like, no, that's the one that'll kill us. And it's really cute exchange. And then he goes in. And right when they think everything's done, because Ego's overpowering everybody, everyone's getting sucked into the planet. Yondu leans over, he's like, I don't control the arrow with my brain, boy. Control it with me. And then he gets covered by rubble, and Star-Lord believes in himself, and then beautiful song plays, and he fucking steps out of the rubble, and fucking hits him and attacks him, and everyone's like, oh shit, we're back, we're alive again. And they all escape, and the bomb explodes, Ego's done. And at the end of the movie, they tease what the fuck's his name? Adam Warlock, who actually in the comics originally was the guy who had the Mind Stone in his head. But we won't know if that's actually happening until Guardians 3 comes out, which we won't know until when that's coming out till later. Okay, so that was that. And then movie number 13, I know, bear with me guys, I'm sorry, is Avengers Age of Ultron, and that's where we're introduced to Ultron, who is a program developed by Tony Stark and Bruce Banner to kind of save the world, so they can kind of disband the Avengers, and he ends up being a malevolent force who takes over his suits and kills Jarvis and fucking attacks them and runs away and shit. And that's also, we find out that Hydra's using the twins as evil people for their bidding, so they are, we find out that they have really awesome powers. Again, Quicksilver's a speedster, and oh yeah, I already talked about these guys, but I was got a little ahead of myself, so I apologize for that. But anyway, in Age of Ultron, honestly, it's a really cool movie. It's not one of the best movies, but it's pretty fun. We meet Hawkeye's family. They end up going to their house for a safe house. And then also, very interesting theory I came across is now in Captain Marvel, we've learned that Nick Fury does not eat toast if it is cut diagonally. That's what he says. He says it himself. And if you'll notice in the kitchen scene in this movie, he is eating, what? A piece of toast cut diagonally. So, what does that tell you? It could be potentially that he was impersonated by Talos at this time as a Skrull. Because if you notice, some of the dialogue he says is kind of stupid too, which is not really Nick Fury-esque. So, I don't know. We don't know. It's never been confirmed or denied. It's just a theory that I came across, and it's really interesting, so I thought I'd mention it. And I am personally a subscriber of that theory, so I think it's cool. And at the end of this movie, they end up creating Vision. So actually, Ultron was creating a body for himself made out of vibranium, and then Tony and Bruce Tony decides, hey, let's fucking put Jarvis in it and make it our thing. And they do, because Thor is like, yeah, we got to make this happen. He has a vision about the Infinity Stones, and he tells them about it. He puts the stone in his forehead. Vision ends up being on their side. He's kind of cool. He's actually, Paul Bettany is the voice of Jarvis, so he's actually got to go from just being a voice to an actual character in the movies. And then, yeah, they defeat Ultron. Again, kind of a whatever movie, but it's fun. It's worth seeing. After Age of Ultron was Ant-Man, chronologically. So Ant-Man was actually, everyone was like, who? So it was a lot of people were skeptical going into it, but I really enjoyed it. It was great. Paul Rudd was great. Michael Douglas's Hank Pym was really good. The Wasp, Evangeline Lilly's gorgeous. Yellow Jacket's played by Corey Stoll. He's a really good villain. He was in House of Cards and also played the main guy in The Strain on FX. And we also meet his daughter and his family. And then we also meet Paxton, who's his daughter's, his wife's. Anyway, he's a cop, but they end up reconciling and being cool at the end. And then the three guys that he's living with, who are his cohorts in crime. One of them's T.I. It's actually really interesting. No Infinity Stones in that one, but it's worth seeing. The next movie chronologically is Captain America: Civil War, which is the trilogy, cap of the trilogy for Captain America, and I think it's really awesome. And you meet Spider-Man in this one for the first time, so it's really cool. Aunt May, Black Panther, we meet for the first time as well. And T.I., he's one of the bad guys. Well, I like him. He's a one of the burglar team in Ant-Man. But going back to Civil War, we also meet Baron Zemo, who is he's a villain in the comics, and he's going to be reappearing in Falcon and Winter Soldier, expectedly in his traditionally purple mask from the comics because people have seen it on the set. But yeah, Civil War was great. It pits basically after Crossbones shows up. He tries to set off an explosion in a square, and Wanda contains it and tries to get it up and out of the air, but she's not strong enough because she's still learning how to use her powers, and so it fucking blows out a fucking floor of a building, and people are mad about it. So the Sokovia Accords are suggested by Lieutenant Ross from The Incredible Hulk, and it basically severs the Avengers by Iron Man is like, we need to sign this and keep us in check, and Captain America's like, no, what if they tell us we can't go somewhere we need to go? What if they tell us we need to go somewhere we don't think we should go? And even if it's, mistakes are going to happen regardless in the best hands of their own. So they had a fight. It was kind of split down the middle. Team Cap was Captain America, Winter Soldier, Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Wanda, and it'll come to me. And then the other side was Tony, Vision, Black Widow, War Machine, Black Panther, and Vision. And the other side, I'll remember I'll scream it out when I remember it, and it'll be really out of the blue. Yeah, no Infinity Stones in that one, but it's pretty good. It's a really good movie. Next movie chronologically is Spider-Man: Homecoming, and this is kind of when they decided to change the timeline officially because they fucked it up. They said 8 years later there was a scene where we meet the Vulture, who's played by Michael Keaton, who was Batman back in the day, and he's a villain now, and he is collecting Chitauri weapons that they find at random sites and selling them on the black market essentially, and turning a pretty good profit. And we also meet MJ, who's not the love interest in this movie, but we meet her, and we meet Ned, who's in the comics ends up becoming the Green Goblin or the Hobgoblin. So we'll see if that plays out in the movies. No Infinity Stone there, but a really great movie, and it introduced Spider-Man into the MCU officially with his own movie. And it was really cool because it starts off, it basically takes off right after Civil War. It's like he leaves the airport, and then he's watching his video diary of the whole experience. So it's really funny to watch, and he's really great. The original two Spider-Men, Tobey Maguire was a really great Peter Parker, not a great Spider-Man. And Andrew Garfield was a really good Spider-Man, not a great Peter Parker. Tom Holland nails both. He has both personas down, and it's awesome. He's really great. And I hope after the third movie they can actually settle on a final deal to keep Spider-Man in the MCU officially. But that's a whole other topic entirely. After Spider-Man: Homecoming is Doctor Strange, and this is where we meet Doctor Strange, who's basically Tony Stark but a doctor. Arrogant asshole, great facial hair, ladies' man. Tom Holland's the best, yeah, in my opinion. Doctor Strange is that we also meet the Ancient One, which was a really controversial casting decision because she's Asian in the comics, and it was played by Tilda Swinton, who's white in real life. We also meet Baron Mordo, who ends up actually he's a villain in the comics, and they kind of allude to that at the end of this movie. They kind of suggest he's going to be villainous in the future. We also meet Wong, who's really great comic relief once he kind of softens up, and Dr. Palmer, who's played by the always beautiful, fuck's her name? Oh god, I can't remember her name. She's in Wedding Crashers. She's in The Notebook. You guys know what I'm talking about. We also meet Dormammu, who is an other dimensional being who is super powerful, way more powerful than Thanos, but because of the time loop that Doctor Strange created, is able to beat him. And so the Time Stone is introduced in this one, which is a stone in the Eye of Agamotto, who's like one of the ancient founders of Kamar-Taj, which is the place where the Ancient One lives, which is the place where Doctor Strange goes to learn all of the mystic arts. Rachel McAdams, thank you. Oh my god, yes, she is beautiful. Sir, hey, I'm trying to have a video. Please stop. Yeah, so we're introduced to the Time Stone in this one, and that's how he's able to win. He's able to, he stops Caecilius dead in his tracks before he stabs him, and he fucking rewinds everything in Hong Kong to make it fixed again. And then he goes into the I can't remember the name of it, but the Dark Realm that Dormammu rules over. I think it's just the Dark Realm, and the Dark Dimension. And he goes and defeats him by getting in a time loop. So it's really cool. And at the end of that, the Time Stone is still with Doctor Strange. He is the Sorcerer Supreme when the Ancient One passes, and he is in charge of protecting the three sanctums from everything of Hong Kong, New York, and London. And then after Doctor Strange, we have Black Panther, which was a really great movie, but because it came out in such a weird social time, everyone was really hung up on the racial aspects of it. So I mean, I honestly I only saw it once in theaters, and I wasn't really interested in seeing it again because people were more interested about making it a racial film than a Marvel movie, in my opinion. And the villain was kind of shitty. Everyone loved him because of who played him, and he's a good actor and all that. But honestly, he had bad motivations. He's kind of a dumbass, and his own ego was his own demise, which is kind of a common theme in villains, but not necessarily Marvel villains. And overall, we meet again the villain Eric Killmonger. We meet Shuri, his little sister, who's Tony Stark smart. Okoye, played by Michonne. Played by Michonne from The Walking Dead, and then Queen Mother Ramonda, who is she's really famous. I forget her name. Maya Angelou, maybe, I don't know. And then M'Baku, who's an asshole. He's like the leader of one of the tribes. There's 5 tribes, and he's the leader of the one that doesn't want to follow suit. And then they end up being like really cool and brotherly at the end. No Infinity Stones, and again, really good movie. But whatever. Anyway, next movie after that chronologically is Thor Ragnarok, which was, again, in my opinion, the first good Thor movie, and it was fucking fantastic. It was directed by the same guy who does What We Do in the Shadows, and he's working on actually Thor 4. And we're introduced to Surtur, which is a big fire demon, and Thor defeats him early on, and he ends up being a big part of the movie later. We meet Hela, played by Cate Blanchett, and she's actually Thor's sister, who Odin banished away because she was too evil. They basically, the two of them went around the universe killing as much people as they wanted, and then Odin was like, oh shit, we probably shouldn't be doing this. And Hela was like, nah, we're good. And then Odin's like, nah, okay, you're sealed away forever. And then when Odin dies, his energy's no longer there to stop her, so she comes back. And she's crazy fucking strong, because like Thor throws Mjolnir at his hammer, which I didn't even talk about in the first 2 movies, but he had a great hammer. It's pretty awesome. Or it was. And then he throws it at her, and she catches it, palms it, like a fucking basketball, and then crushes it in her hand, which is crazy. And then they try to get teleported back in the Bifrost back to Asgard, which Loki activated it, but he wasn't supposed to because Hela gets her fucking power from Asgard. So as soon as she gets there, she gets that much more powerful, and she draws her power from Asgard. So the longer she's there, the more powerful she becomes. And so she ends up going back and kicks the two of them out of the Bifrost, and they end up on the same planet miraculously, where they meet Valkyrie, who used to be an Asgardian. She was one of the most powerful warriors in Asgard before Hela destroyed them all back in the day. We meet Korg, who's really funny. He's voiced by the director as well. I know his name. I'm just not going to say it because I'm going to butcher it. We also meet Meek, who's just kind of there for being there. And the Grand Master, played by Jeff Goldblum, is actually hysterical. He's actually an elder as well. He's technically the Collector's brother, which I don't know, again, if that's MCU canon, but it's comic canon. Canon means true to the story and accurate and not, superfluous. And at this one, yeah, so at the end of this one, if you'll remember at the end of Avengers, I don't think I mentioned it, but Thor takes the Tesseract back to Asgard with him. And so at the end of this movie, Asgard is being destroyed by Surtur, the fire demon, as per Ragnarok, which is the ancient Norse end of days, and it's a cycle. And as Surtur is destroying Asgard in order to defeat Hela, because there's no Asgard anymore, her power would deplete. Loki snatches up the Tesseract on his way out of Odin's vault, and so he's in possession of it, and something to keep in mind. And then at the end of that movie, they get on a ship and leave, and it's Thor and Hulk and a bunch of Asgardians and Heimdall, and Loki, and they're on their way. And at the end of this movie, we see at the end credits scene, Thor gets an eye back, and we see a big fucking ship in the horizon, and it's fucking Thanos. And we are teased. We wait so long. What's the next movie? Infinity War. The next movie is Infinity War. Thor Ragnarok came out November 3rd, 2017. Infinity War came out April 27th, 2018. It actually got pulled up a week. It was supposed to come out May 4th, and then RDJ was like, hey, can I watch the movie a week early? And Marvel was like, yeah. It was a big promotional thing on Instagram. It was actually really funny. And he's like, can I bring all my friends? And Marvel was like, yeah. He's like, can I bring the world? And they're like, yeah. And so they brought up the release date a week, and it was really great. So we had to wait. I mean, it didn't seem like a long time, but like 5 or 6 months between seeing Thanos' ship and then seeing what the fuck happens after we see Thanos' ship. So it's kind of a big tease. So after that, we see Infinity War. And this is the fucking culmination of everything. This is the beginning of the end. We meet the children of Thanos: Proxima Midnight, Corvus Glaive, Ebony Maw, and Cull Obsidian. There's actually a fifth one in the comics, but they only introduced 4 in the movies. And Eitri, who's ironically a dwarf, played by the wonderful midget Peter Dinklage. And Thanos, we see, fucking is on board of the ship, decimates the Asgardians, killing everybody, just fucking manhandles the Hulk like he's a baby. And he already is in possession of the Power Stone. Said he decimated Xandar to have it. So he's got this gauntlet on. Which one is it? Is it on? I meant to wear my ring. It's in the other room. But anyway, I think it's this one. But he's got the Infinity Gauntlet on, and it's got the Power Stone in it. And Loki offers him the Tesseract, which has the Space Stone. And in doing so, he saves his brother's life. And Thanos is holding the Power Stone to Thor's head, killing him, and Loki's like, all right, here it is. And then he tries to kill him, and then Loki, he gets fucking choked to death by Thanos, and he's like, no more resurrections, you're done, brother. And kills him officially, because this is like the 3rd time he's died, so we think he's coming back, but no, he's done. I mean, he has a show coming out, but I'll get more into that later. So anyway, Infinity War. We end up seeing they come to two of his lackeys come to Earth, Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian, the telepath, and the dude with the big hammer, and they come, and Doctor Strange and Hulk have gotten Tony, and they're like explaining him everything. They tell him, all right, so Thanos is a thing, the Infinity Stones are a thing, and they're on their way to fucking take them all from us, and so those are the things he learns from them, and then Ebony Maw and Cull Obsidian show up, and they end up defeating, well, they don't actually, they defeat one of them, and then Cull Obsidian takes Doctor Strange aboard his ship to take the Mind Stone back to Thanos, and Iron Man boards the ship without him knowing, and Spider-Man actually boards the ship without Iron Man knowing, and they save Doctor Strange, they blow a hole in the ship, Ebony Maw gets sucked out, and they seal it, and then rather than go back to Earth, they go to Titan, which is Thanos' homeworld, and they try to take him by surprise, but they end up meeting a couple of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and they fight each other, blah, 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 and they're like, hey, you know Thor, what's going on? And they end up devising a plan to work together to take down Thanos, and it would have worked perfectly if Star-Lord had just stopped being a little bitch. But what happened was Thanos took Gamora, they went to the other Guardians, they went to the Collector to get the Reality Stone, and in doing so, Thanos was there getting it, so he now has the Power Stone, the Space Stone, and the Reality Stone on his hand, on the gauntlet, and he takes Gamora because she knows where the Soul Stone is, and no one else does, so he takes her, but the other 3 Guardians are still there, so those are the ones that end up meeting Tony. It was Mantis, Drax, and Star-Lord, and it's Strange, Tony, and Spider-Man on Titan, and then they find out Gamora's dead, and Star-Lord fucking loses his mind and just starts hitting him in the head, and ends up hitting like one of friendly fire, and then Thanos, he hits Mantis's hand, who lets go, and Thanos is able to regain some control of his mind and fucking swats them all away. And in doing so, they end up fighting. He ends up fighting. It's a really great battle scene on Titan, actually. And he ends up getting the Time Stone from Doctor Strange, because he ends up seeing in the future there's 14 million and something in 6 different outcomes, and they only win 1. So he has to make sure everything that happens a certain way. So he ends up going, and he says, listen, I will fucking let you guys die before I give him the Time Stone. But at the end of the day, he gave him the Time Stone because apparently that was the only way. So he gets the Time Stone, and then Thanos leaves, goes to Wakanda, which is where they're fighting the rest of Thanos' army, the Black Panther, Captain America, Winter Soldier, all that whole squad. They're all fighting, and then Thanos shows up, and it looks like it's going to be too much, because now he has 5 stones. He's got all of them, except for the fucking Mind Stone. And Vision, they're protecting him because he's weakened by the glaive. I'm sorry, I know I'm jumping all over the place. I forget that there's a lot of information in here. But go see the movies. Go see the movies, and they're really good. You got plenty of time now. We got quarantine until the 30th, right? But at the end of the day, he ends up getting all the stones. Thor almost kills him. He gets a new weapon from Eitri the Dwarf on his planet and fucking tanks the full force of a Neuron star. And he takes this axe, drives it into Thanos' chest, and Thanos is like, "Hey, you should aim for the head, bitch." And he snaps, fucking decimates half of the world, or half the universe, excuse me. And people just start dusting. And the people, not the people you think either, because it's all the original heroes left. But that's because they have to save the day in Endgame. So then, yeah, that's the end of the thing. All of them dust. And then the next movie that comes out actually after Infinity War is not Endgame. It's Ant-Man and the Wasp, which is a really good movie. And they really explore the quantum realm, which is really important in the next movie. But the main part of that movie, again, is learning the quantum realm is very diverse and that they have full access to it. And at the end of this movie, the end credits scene, Ant-Man goes into the quantum realm. And fucking while he's in there, the Wasp and Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne, who they rescue from the quantum realm, are all dusted and Thanos is snapped. So he's stuck in the fucking quantum realm for like 5 years, but he doesn't realize it's 5 years because time works differently in the quantum realm. And 5 years later is when Endgame starts, and we see all of our heroes. Captain America's leading support groups for people who've lost people. Black Widow's kind of taking over the mantle of Nick Fury and taking control of everything. And Iron Man is living his best life with Pepper and his daughter. And Hulk has become Professor Hulk, which a lot of people are mad about because, one, it's not an semblance of them together. It's basically Bruce Banner's mind enslaving the Hulk's body because there's no, it's all Bruce Banner. There's no Hulk when he talks. Thor is grieving and he's fat and overweight and an alcoholic. And yeah, they're all doing their own thing, but they're all still around. And so they figure out, at the end of Infinity War 2, what's important is Nick Fury gets dusted, and as he gets dusted, he presses this button on his pager, which we found out in Captain Marvel is a pager to reach Captain Marvel. So she ends up coming back to Earth because she was paged. So they're all talking, and she shows up out of the blue, and she's like, "All right, where's Fury?" And that's so that she gets the down low on everything, and they decide, okay, well we know it's signature that the time stones create, they're the stones created, and then we heard the another signature over here, and it's the exact same. So that's probably where Thanos is. So they all went there and they killed him. But when they went there, they find out that the second snap was he used to destroy the stones. So now they can't do anything about it. So they decide. Actually, at this point, Ant-Man gets released out of the quantum realm, and he explains it. He goes to Avengers HQ and fucking explains it to Black Widow and Captain America about everything. And they're like, well, I mean, shit, we could do it. Let's go talk to Tony. And Tony's like, nah, I love my life. This is great. But at the back of his mind, he's always got that guilt about Spider-Man being dusted. So in a couple of days, he develops time travel, which is pretty awesome. And so they do it. They fucking time heist. They go back in time. They go back to the Avengers movie 2012 to get the Time Stone, the Mind Stone, and the Space Stone from the Tesseract, from the Kamar-Taj, the Scepter, and the Tesseract, respectively. And then a couple of them go back to Vormir. They don't realize that they have to sacrifice someone when they go there. So it's Black Widow and Hawkeye go to Vormir to get the Soul Stone, and then they Nebula and War Machine go get the Power Stone from Morag. But in doing so, Nebula's old self and her future self, they get crossed on the same frequency. So Thanos finds out she's there, abducts her, and that's how he finds out what happens in the future. So he ends up traveling through time to get to the Avengers in the future after the time heist is over. So he sends the evil Nebula back to the future, and she ends up figuring out how to use the machine to get him back. And the Reality Stone, Rocket and Thor go to get it, and Rocket ejects or fucking syringes it out of Jane Foster, while Thor has a really beautiful moment with his mom, and he realizes he's worthy again because he finds that Mjolnir of that time. It brings it back to the future with him, so he has two weapons now. And then we later on we obviously all find out that Captain America was worthy the whole time because he was able to make it wiggle in Age of Ultron, and he fucking is able to wield it at full power in Endgame, which was a huge. I mean, it was great fan service, but it was really fucking awesome. So they end up getting all the stones together, and they reverse the snap, which is called the blip. And right after it, fucking Thanos shows up and fucking decimates Avengers HQ, and that's when the real battle starts. So, it's a who's who of who's grabbing the gauntlet to get it to who needs to get it. They're going to try and throw it into the quantum realm so Thanos can't get to it. And it passes through so many hands, and people are fighting Thanos, and fucking Captain Marvel shows up out of nowhere and fucking crushes a fucking alien spaceship like a box of animal crackers, and she, tanks a hit from Thanos when he's using the Power Stone of the gauntlet, and it's crazy, super awesome fight scene. Spider-Man suit. In the scene where everyone comes back in, it's like Falcon is like, hey, Steve, are you there? And fucking, I got chills when I saw it because he's dead. He's fucking snapped. And then Steve's like, what? And then all these portals open up, and fucking Doctor Strange walks through with all the dusted heroes and all the people from Kamar-Taj and this and that. And they just fucking, Steve says, he catches Mjolnir, and he's like, Avengers assemble. And everyone in the fucking movie theater jizzed their pants. And they fucking start the fight scene, and it was great. And at the end of it all, they end up winning because Tony sacrifices himself. We don't realize it because he has a nano suit, but he's wrestling with Thanos, and Thanos, he snaps, and he's like, what the fuck? And he looks, and there's no gems on his hand. And we look over, and Tony's got all of them in his they're like, meshing into his suit, and he fucking's like, oh, I'm dying. That's gonna be a weird meme later, but he's dying from the power of the stones, and he has originally he was never supposed to say anything, but Tony Stark, he never does the same take, or RDJ never does the same take twice. Literally every time he does a scene, it's different. He says something different. So he finally said, I am Iron Man, and that's a callback to the very first movie where he admits that he's Iron Man at the end at the press conference. So it was a really poetic close to his chapter, his story. And he snaps, and everyone, all the evil people dust away. And it's really beautiful. And they have a funeral for him and everything, and everyone's mad they didn't have a funeral for Black Widow, but her movie got pushed. More on that later. But it was a really great kind of ending to Tony's it was a really great ending to Tony's story, really great ending to Captain America's story. He went back in time to return all the stones and ended up staying with Peggy Carter for the remainder of her life, and then came back when it was over, and he was 106 years old when he came back. So he passed the mantle of Captain America down to the Falcon. People are speculating that Hulk's done, but the Russo brothers just kind of did that because they're dicks. But the next director could be like, all right, it's the fucking Hulk. He has regenerative powers. He's going to fucking get his arm back. So we'll see what happens with him. And now that they have the rights to Universal now, so they can use the Hulk, they got the rights from Universal, so they can use the Hulk now and Namor, who's the Marvel version of Aquaman. So they may not make a solo movie for him since Aquaman's so successful in the DC universe, but there's theories that he might be in a future, as a future villain, maybe Black Panther 2 or 3 or something, and then be a future Avenger. And yeah, that's not the last movie. One more, sorry. The last movie in the Infinity Saga is Spider-Man: Far From Home, where we meet Mysterio. We meet the Chameleon too, which people don't realize. He's one of the lackeys of Mysterio, and Edith, who's an AI program, which means even dead, I'm the hero. It's from Tony, given to Peter, and he meets in this movie. We assume that he's talking to Nick Fury and Maria Hill the whole time, but they're kind of off. And at the end of the movie, we realize it's fucking Talos and Soren in disguise as Skrulls. So that's why the whole theory about who Nick Fury was in Age of Ultron comes into question, because we find out what they were on Earth pretending to be them. Nick Fury was on a space station fucking somewhere. Maybe in Earth, maybe not. And a lot of people are speculating that this is SWORD, which is, I forget what it stands for, but it's the space version of S.H.I.E.L.D. And Captain Marvel is a big part of leading that force. So that could be the way they go, the direction that they head in the future with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We won't know until the next few movies come out. But that is the end of the MCU as we know it currently. All the movies from Iron Man when it first came out, May 2nd, 2008, to Spider-Man: Far From Home when it came out July 2nd, 2019. So 11 years of movie making, 23 movies, and that's the full universe. Going forward, since a lot of people didn't realize, Stacy, that there was a future to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the next movie that was supposed to come out on May 1st is Black Widow, now pushed. The next 6 pushed, but the next 6 or next 7, I think, it's Black Widow, who we're probably going to get introduced to Taskmaster. He's in the previews. Yelena Belova, who's potentially the next Black Widow, and Red Guardian, who's the Russian version of Captain America, played by David Harbour. I'm really fucking excited for that. And then the Eternals, which is they're a whole other thing in their own. I could talk about I could do another bed talk about the future of Marvel, but I will just tell you the rundown. There's going to introduce all those characters in that. I'm not going to go into it though, but I'll do another one maybe if people are interested, and we'll see how many views we get on YouTube or whatever. And then after that is Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, who's just basically a martial artist, but we might be introduced to the actual Mandarin, who is the part of the Ten Rings, which is this association that kidnapped Tony back in 2008, per the orders of Obadiah Stane, a.k.a. Ironmonger. And then after Shang-Chi is going to be Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where we may or may not get introduced to... the next one is Spider-Man 3. They just haven't decided what it's going to be called yet. And we may be introduced to Matt Murdock in that movie, who was also Daredevil. And it might be the same guy who played him in the Netflix show, which would be really awesome. Yes, all these new movies will be part of the MCU. What's in the MCU is what's released by Marvel Studios and Disney. Fox used to own all the rights to the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and all those characters and all those storylines and all those... Like, literally, Marvel movies could not use the word mutant because Fox owned the word mutant. Just like every time the Droid phone had a commercial, they had to give George Lucas royalties because he owned he owns the rights to the word droid. True, look it up. But that's the same thing now that they own Fox, so they have all those rights back. And like I said, they got Hulk back from Universal, so there shouldn't be any real issues going forward unless Sony really wants to be a bitch about it after the third Spider-Man movie, because we have one more full Spider-Man movie in the MCU and one more cameo, and then after that, it's expected he's supposed to go back to Sony. And Sony, the way it's going, it looks like Sony and Marvel are kind of like gonna have a partnership going forward, because Venom, the next Venom movie, I think Tom Holland is supposed to be in it, and there's supposed to be crossovers from certain characters, so we'll see how it goes, but I'm not sure. I haven't really seen any of the Sony movies because they're not MCU, but if they get retconned, I'm gonna have to go see them. And then after Spider-Man 3 is Doctor Strange 2, which we might meet Magic, who is Colossus's sister from the X-Men, and she's a reality warper, so there's a potential that she could pop up have a cameo, maybe an end credit scene. After that is Thor: Love and Thunder, where we're going to be introduced to the mighty Thor, who is Jane Foster's Thor, okay. And then the next one's Black Panther 2. That should be really good. Like I said, we might see Namor as the villain, who knows. And then after that is Captain Marvel 2. And then after that, there's dates set through November 3rd, 2023. They have a movie February, May, July, November, every year, next year through 2023 scheduled. And the movies they could come out they still have Ant-Man 3, they still have Guardians of the Galaxy 3, they still have Blade, which they teased, so we know those are coming out, we just don't know when. And then I will wrap up this with the shows that are coming out on Disney+, which will also be part of the MCU. Falcon and Winter Soldier, 6-episode miniseries coming out this August. WandaVision, 6-episode miniseries coming out in December. This one is supposed to tie in... Well, Falcon and Winter Soldier is supposed to tie in, I'm assuming, to Captain America the Winter Soldier. We also are going to meet U.S. Agent, I think, in this one, who is what the government replaces Captain America with, and he ends up being a real D-bag. And then WandaVision, we're going to potentially meet their children, and maybe Hulkling, who ends up actually being one of her son's boyfriends. So if that's the way Marvel's going to go, that might be the way they do it. And that's supposed to tie in heavily to the Doctor Strange sequel. Loki is also supposed to tie into the Doctor Strange sequel, and we're probably going to meet the Time Variance Authority because of the Super Bowl commercial we saw. It said TVA on his prison jumper, and that stands for Time Variance Authority. So we think that after Endgame, when he escaped with the Tesseract, that he's just jumping from maybe reality to reality, maybe universe to universe, maybe just jumping through time in that timeline, and he got captured by the Time Variance Authority. So we'll see what happens there. I don't know. And then the What If series is going to introduce the Watcher, though this is an animated series. It's going to be 23 episodes, one episode for every movie, and they're going to do like, oh, what if this happened? And then give you a half hour of what would have happened if it was that. And there's one that I think is coming out, is supposed to be what if Iron Man was the one that ended up on Sakaar instead of Thor in Thor 3. So the theory is that after Avengers, when Tony flew the nuclear bomb into the wormhole to destroy the Chitauri, he never fell back into Earth, and that he He got sent to Sakaar, so that could be interesting. And then after that's Hawkeye, which might introduce Kate Bishop after who's the next Hawkeye. So I'm being told by the top of my screen that I have 17 seconds to go, so I can't believe I talked for a full hour, but I want to thank the three of you who are consistently here the whole time. And yeah, if it makes it to YouTube, I hope everyone enjoys it. And if